Hello. The fun thing about reading for Graham's Storytime, The Diamond in the Window, is it's been so long since I've read it that I remember just enough and I've forgotten just enough to make it interesting to me too, because I'm going, what comes next? I think I know what happens, but I'm not sure. So I'm just as interested to see what happens as you are. Okay, so this is, I forgot to show you the illustrator. The illustrator, of course, is the person who draws the pictures, with illustrations by Eric Bledbed. And I will show you some of the drawings again because now they're meaning more. There's Percival, the peacock, Eleanor took apart. And here is the front hall of the Hall's house. Mrs. Truth, the bronze statue. The light does not light up anymore. And they hang their coats and hats and umbrellas on her. Okay. So this is chapter 7. And it's called Mrs. Prawn Barges In. Now remember, Mrs. Prawn is the lady, the skinny lady from the bank that Edward called broomstick backwards. Screamed at her. But Edward and Eleanor had no more dreams for a while, and when they did, the dream was a pretty harmless one. Afterwards, Eleanor decided it must have been invented just for Nora. It began with the wedding Eleanor was arranging. She was marrying Louisa May Alcott's bust to Henry Thoreau's. It had struck her one day that Louisa had been a spinster in real life, and Henry a bachelor. Now I'm going to go back for about 3 words here. A bust is a statue that's just about the chest up. Have you seen the statues with just the head of somebody? That's called a bust. So Uncle Freddie had a bust of Henry and Thoreau in his office. And there was a bust of Louisa May Alcott. She's another author, but she wasn't allowed in. And a spinster is a woman who is never married, and a bachelor is a man who is unmarried. So here we go. She, Eleanor, was marrying Louisa May Alcott's bust to Henry Thoreau's. It had struck her one day that Louisa had been a spinster in real life and Henry a bachelor. And wasn't there something soft and pleading in Louisa's plaster eyes? Wasn't there something manly and highly attractive, too, in Henry's marble good looks? Eleanor decided that they had been deeply in love for the better part of a century and ought to be married without further delay. Waldo would marry them, of course. He had been a clergyman once, so that worked out just right. But first, Eleanor chaperoned their wooing. She wrote pining love letters for each of them and delivered them back and forth from parlor to front hall, reading them aloud softly to the recipients like a dutiful duenna. Under Uncle Freddie wouldn't approve, of course, so Eleanor conducted the romance when he wasn't there. When Henry's avowals of undying love had won a bashful acceptance from Louisa, Eleanor prepared for the ceremony. She gathered some wild flowers and put them in a glass on the parlor table. She lighted candles. She tipped Louisa May dangerously over to roll on the edge of her columnar base into the parlor and stand beside Henry. It was too bad that Louisa's bust was larger than Henry. It was too bad that Louisa's bust was larger than life size. It towered several inches over Henry's. He looked dignified, but somewhat overpowered beside her. Eleanor found an old piece of net and draped it tenderly over Louisa's large bun. It covered the chipped places on the top of her head, but not the one on her nose. Better bring it forward, just enough to hide the chip. Now, did a few daisies arranged on the top of the veil help, or did they look too fussy? They were lovely. Eleanor decided, standing back and clasping her hands. Louisa looked almost pretty. Next to roll Waldo into position. There was a terrible moment when she discovered almost too late that he was not fastened to his base, and he almost teetered off it. After a wild series of wobbles and counter-wobbles, he jiggled serenely back into position, smiling all the while his saintly smile. Eleanor bumped him across the floor carefully until he faced the tender couple. Tum, tum, ta-dum, sang Eleanor. She played a few chords on the piano. Then she got up and talked in a deep, rich voice for Waldo. "We are gathered here today to join in the bonds of holy matrimony, this man and this woman. Do you, Louisa, solemnly swear to love, honor, and obey your husband till death do you part?" "I do," said Louisa shyly. "Do you, Henry," said Waldo, "promise to love, honor, and cherish this woman till death do you part?" Henry was about to answer when Uncle Freddy suddenly parted the curtains and burst in. His eyes goggled at the sentimental scene. "I forbid it! I forbid this union!" he cried. "My poor Henry! They would never get along!" He snatched off Louisa's veil, he picked her up and carried her bodily back out into the hall, staggering under her weight. He set her down with a bang that jarred some more chips off her nose, and he glared at Eleanor and marched off in wrath. Eleanor burst into tears. She put her arms around Louisa to console her. "Never you mind," wept Eleanor. "Don't you cry. There are other fish in the sea besides old Henry. Just because he lived in a house in the woods by Walden Pond and wrote a book about it, Uncle Freddy thinks he's wonderful." Eleanor stroked Louisa's chipped nose. "Why, I bet you wrote twice as many books as he did, and I'll bet about 1,000,000 people read your books every day. I'll bet 1,000,000 girls my age are reading Little Women right now, somewhere in the world." Eleanor felt soothed. That was fame. That was glory. Just to prove her loyalty to Louisa, she went upstairs to the tower room and found Nora's copy of Little Women, and came back downstairs with it. She sat down on the floor in front of Louisa May Alcott's plaster bust. Ostentatiously she opened the book and started to read. She had only read 5 sentences when she looked up at Louisa, her mind alive with an idea. This was the 5th sentence. The 4 young faces on which the firelight shone brightened at the cheerful words. 4 young faces, Eleanor said over to herself. The mystic verse from the window. The second is a doll child possessed by one of 4, fit for any princess to mother and adore. Could it be that in Orchard House there's a beautiful doll that had belonged to one of the 4 Alcott sisters? Eleanor slammed the book shut. She was sure of it. Little Women was the story of Meg, Jo, Beth, and Amy March, but Eleanor knew that much of the story had been taken from the real life of Louisa May Alcott, who had done part of her growing up in Concord, just over yonder on Lexington Road. The doll must have been hers. It might still be there, preserved forever for the eyes of visiting tourists. But it was the treasure, Nora's treasure, Eleanor's treasure. How could she get it back? To get into Orchard House she would have to have money. It was a museum now, with a lady guide to show people around. Eleanor told Edward about her plan. He didn't think much of it, but he was the one with the money. It sat on his dresser, 7 nickels, 13 pennies, and 2 dimes, all arranged in a geometrical pattern, with 16 bottle caps, 5 sugar lumps, and 24 match boxes. "I'll have to rearrange everything," said Edward wearily, but he gave in, put the money in his pocket, and went along. At the door they were met by the guide. They paid their money and joined a group of tourists in Mr. Alcott's library. The others were mostly elderly ladies. They oohed and awed over everything. The lady guide explained that Mr. Alcott was a close friend of Mr. Emerson's. She pointed out the books and the pictures and the inspiring motto over the fireplace: "The hills are reared, the seas are scooped in vain, if learning's altar vanish from the plain." Edward began backing up. Ever so casually he backed his way right out of the room. Eleanor backed out too. Had anyone seen them go? No one seemed to have missed them. Swiftly they looked around the second room. It was full of glass cases, paintings by Louisa's artistic younger sister, who was Amy in Little Women, a plaster cast of her foot, a fan, but no doll. "Come on," said Edward, and they wandered freely over the small house, examining the kitchen, the dining room, the parlor. Then they cautiously climbed up the stairs and looked around on the second floor. The party of tourists came up too. before long, and Edward and Eleanor dodged ahead of them, moving swiftly and quietly from room to room. They examined Louisa's room, her sister May's room, Mother Alcott's room. No dolls were to be found. The official party had made its way downstairs again and out the front door, when Eleanor and Edward discovered a little room at the very back of the house that was fitted up for children. There were pieces of small-sized furniture in it, and a little iron bedstead, and some dolls, some games and toys. "There must be a doll here," said Eleanor. They forgot caution and handled everything. Eleanor lifted the little desktop and looked inside. Edward began to grope under the mattress of the bed. Then Eleanor found a narrow space filled with old round-topped trunks. She was on her hands and knees unstrapping one of them when she heard a terrible sound. Another party of tourists were approaching. Where had they come from? There hadn't been time for a new party to do the downstairs, but here they were. Eleanor froze with her guilty hand inside the trunk. It was Miss Prawn. She had just walked right in with her own group of ladies. She sailed right past Eleanor and stood in the middle of the room giving a lecture. Eleanor peeked at the large backs of the ladies. One of them was especially stout. She was Miss Prawn's second cousin. Miss Prawn was talking in a sugary voice. "Oh, my friends," she said, "how reverently we do cherish the memory of our sweet Louisa May, who spent the happiest moments of her dear childhood in our own beloved Concord. She was such a lovely child, so sweet and refined and genteel. And what a lesson it is to see the results of ladylike childhood, the fruit of an educated home, especially today. Why, I know of 2 children almost within the sound of my voice, so wild and ill-mannered you wouldn't believe it." Eleanor stayed frozen. Perhaps if she didn't move so much as a hair, they might go away without seeing her. But where was Edward? There was no place for him to hide, no closet, no door, and the little room was a dead end. Could he have climbed out the window? Suddenly there was a scream, then scream after scream. Miss Prawn had sat down on Eddie. He had been lying stiff and flat and still in the bed, with the covers pulled up over his head. He reared up now and roared, "Kitsmaborb," which of course is broomstick backwards. Eleanor decided with a kind of doomsday joy that they might as well be killed for a sheep as for a lamb. She jumped out from behind the trunk. Miss Prawn caught sight of her at once, and her screams went up an octave. Miss Prawn's second cousin was yanking Edward out of the bed and shaking him. She gave him a dreadful slap across the face. Eleanor jumped at her and sank her teeth into her arm. Then there was a free-for-all, with Miss Prawn standing in the middle, howling, and 6 large ladies doing battle with 2 small children. The ladies had weapons in the shape of umbrellas and heavy pocketbooks, and the ladies won. If there was treasure hidden in Orchard House, Eleanor knew now they would never find it. They were marched angrily home by Miss Prawn's second cousin. Miss Prawn was still having hysterics and couldn't do it herself. The doorbell of the Hall's house was pushed imperiously, and Aunt Lily was given a tongue-lashing. Miss Prawn's second cousin used phrases like criminal assault and parental neglect and disgraceful living conditions. Aunt Lily said she was sorry, and she looked so sad that Eleanor and Edward both felt heartily ashamed of having caused her trouble, as if she didn't have enough of it already. When Miss Prawn's angry relative had gone, Aunt Lily didn't say anything. She just gave them supper and got ready to leave the house. She was going out in her old car to another town where she had taken on still more new pupils. She was wearing herself out with teaching, trying to pay the back taxes. She came in to say goodbye while Eleanor was tidying up. She looked a little forlorn as she buttoned the front of her old black coat. For the first time Eleanor wondered if perhaps Aunt Lily did look a little old. Her nose was red, so were her eyes, and her hair was pulled back plainly, painfully tight. "Perhaps I am neglecting you, the way the woman said," said Aunt Lily. She dabbed at her eyes and went out. Eleanor and Edward watched her back her car out of the barn and progress in a stately fashion down the street, her spine straight, her head high. Eleanor suddenly saw her as a mythical heroine, as glorious in her ancient automobile on the way to Acton to give a piano lesson as some Greek goddess with a flowing white gown riding in her chariot in a picture. "You're not neglecting us," said Eleanor to herself, tugging angrily at the dish towel. "We're neglecting you." They must find some of the treasure, and soon, not just for Ned and Nora, but to help Aunt Lily now. End of chapter.